Tonight, Hurricane Bonnie moving away from the coast of Mexico as a Category 3. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 6th. Well, here we are for another Tropical Weather Bulletin. You can see what's going on across the wide world of tropics. We have Hurricane Bonnie, which is the first Atlantic East-Pac crossover to become a Cat 3 in the Pacific side of things since Cesar Douglas in 1996. There's also the remnants of IMAGERY. It lost its low-level circulation and is no longer able to be classified as a tropical cyclone. It's day 36 of Atlantic hurricane season. You can see what's going on here. It's a blank slate with nothing on the horizon and really nothing on the models in general. Looking through it earlier, there was pretty much nothing through the halfway point of July, so it looks like we are in for a quiet period in this basin. In the eastern Pacific, you can see what's going on with Bonnie, a storm that has lasted quite a bit and will last about 4 or 5 more days before turning post-tropical towards the beginning of next week. Yep, it's Cat 3 right now, but death is already in the forecast in the NHC side of things, at least. In the eastern Pacific, you can see what's going on. IMAGERY is post-tropical now to the south of Tokyo, and you can also see we have a new area of interest to the west of the Mariana Islands. 20% chance for right now. Of course, there's going to be some more model support necessary before chances do go up on that. In the North Indian Ocean, it is all quiet here, not much going on besides the typical monsoons that we typically see in the summer. So that isn't a pattern that's expected to be changing anytime soon here. It's not until October, November that we see that second peak. Here is that satellite imagery, and you can see that Bonnie has practically leveled off in intensity at the moment. Winds of 115 miles an hour, making it the first major to the Eastern Pacific season, although it's kind of essentially a donation storm from the Atlantic given the fact that it was not an Eastern Pacific name that is now the strongest storm of the season for the Eastern Pacific. Pretty ironic in terms of that side of things. But looking at the satellite imagery as a whole, you can see what's going on in the Atlantic. That cold front continuing to decay now as it continues to go off more into the Atlantic. Other than that, not much going on. Not really much of a presence of extratropical lows to the south of the Arctic Circle at the moment either. In the Eastern Pacific, you can quite clearly see Bonnie. It's really the only main feature you can really see out of that. Everywhere west of it is practically dealing with dry air, and Bonnie will slowly be making its way towards that soon enough, especially the colder temperatures. Western Pacific, you can see the remnants of Chaba continue to produce rainfall in the eastern China. You can also see IMAGERY's mess to the south of Japan, and not really much going on elsewhere besides that. And in the North Indian Ocean, it is a mess with the monsoonal activity that is going on in both the Bay of Bengal and Arabian Sea. Central and southern India getting hit with clouds and showers yet again. And you can see what's going on in the southwestern Indian Ocean is the complete opposite. It is pretty dry here, not much going on. Any disturbance is really confined to the low latitudes of the southern hemisphere. Of course, given the fact it's the southern hemisphere, that means it would be towards the equator. So you can see what's going on in the Australian region. Not much. There's a lot of cloud cover going on in the eastern side of Australia and moving off the coast now. But given the extent as to how wide and expansive that cloud cover is, not really anything that's going to be developing anytime soon. Here are the sea surface temperatures in the eastern Pacific. They look like this: 28 to 29 across the immediate coast of Mexico, but as you head westwards, those temperatures do decrease to around 27 to 26, and further as you head northwards. Gulf of Mexico, it's around 29 to 30 degrees Celsius. The Caribbean, Western Atlantic, and main development region, all looking around the same, around 27 to 28 degrees Celsius. Some areas near 29 degrees Celsius towards Cuba now, so we are starting to see those 29 degrees Celsius temperatures start to expand. Other than that, it's pretty much around what you would typically expect, plus some degrees, especially across the Western Atlantic. Anyways, in the Bay of Bengal, it's around 28 to 29. Arabian Sea, it's around 29 to 30 as you head in the northern part of the ocean, but as you head south, that temperature does decrease. Western Pacific, we're looking at 28 to 29. Those 30 degrees Celsius temperatures are still hampered given the tracks of Chaba and IMAGERY just recently. And in the southern hemisphere, those temperatures continue to slowly decrease given the fact that we are in the off-season there. That season will be beginning again for at least another 4 months, hopefully, as long as there's no random invests that develop in the pre-season side of things. Here are the sea surface temperature anomalies. You can see what's going on with that. Main development region in Gulf of Mexico looking above average. Eastern Pacific looking near to slightly below average. Western Pacific looking above average, although there is a bit of a cool spot now in the South China Sea thanks to Chaba. and in the North Indian Ocean you can see that it's above average in the Bay of Bengal. Ocean heat content. Atlantic is still looking at that death spot in the eastern Gulf of Mexico that refuses to go anywhere. More OHC developing in the Caribbean, especially to the south of Cuba, and it looks like there's a little bit more in the main development region than last night. In the Western Pacific, it's been the same trend where there's a lot of ocean heat content to the east of the Philippines. Not much besides that. Eastern Pacific is looking dreadful in the ocean heat content department like it has been for quite a while now. Alright, here are the short-term models, and you can see we're starting off the Eastern Pacific. I regret to inform the Atlantic fanboys that there are nothing in the models for the next 2 weeks there in terms of the GFS side of things. But looking at where Bonnie is expected to track, you can see the GFS has once again initialized way too weak. This storm, as of the 21Z advisory, has a pressure of 964 millibars, and the GFS is initializing at 991. Let's see if the GFS ever does realize that it is way too weak, and nope, it never actually does get to the peak it currently has. But they do indicate some strengthening as possible. I really don't know what the GFS is trying to imply here, but they also do develop another disturbance to the behind. Looks like around hour 120 is where it starts getting itself going, but again, I'm not sure what is going up with the GFS as of late, given the fact that it initialized Bonnie way too strong, but at the same time they have another system going on. That's something we're going to have to watch, because this system is definitely not 27 millibars weaker than the GFS is trying to show it to be. Looking at the Western Pacific, you can see the remnants of tropic continuing to bring heavy rain to eastern China. You can also see the remnants of IMAGERY, which are expected to get absorbed by this new low, and then eventually turn extratropical. The outer bands could still begin to affect eastern Japan for the next few days, but what's also going to be interesting is that another disturbance could be forming to the west of the Mariana Islands. This has been something models have been wanting for days, and more of the ensembles are starting to pick up on this. The Canadian model also wanting this storm to develop. And then as we head into the day 5 mark, you can see that it's already up to 988 millibars on that run. Looks like this is a little bit east of where the models do want it. There's a bit of a north-northwestern jog that other models want, and you can see the beginning of what could be another disturbance that the GFS wants at hour 120. So here's hour 120, you can see what ends up of that secondary disturbance there. Looks like it decides to rapidly strengthen into a category 3, as this seems to be the normal case for anything in the Eastern Pacific by the GFS. Eventually weakens and is pretty much gone by the 16th. Now that has been pushed forward 2 days, mainly because most of the storm was pushed yet again, which seems to be a common trend here. The storm keeps getting pushed, and I'm starting to wonder if that's even going to happen at this point. We'll see what ends up happening, but again, I wouldn't put too much confidence based off the GFS error with Bonnie, and in terms of initialization, I wouldn't put too much money on this secondary Eastern Pacific disturbance quite yet. In the Western Pacific, you can see what ends up of that secondary thing there. Looks like the typhoon that the GFS tries to develop continues to swerve away, which would be good, keeping it away from Japan. We also have another disturbance and a large rotation developing in the South China Sea. We can see, yep, there you go, another tropical cyclone that develops and goes to the Okinawa Islands. Wow, looks like the South China Sea thing is way too large to actually develop, but it looks like the GFS now wants a Category 2 or low-end Category 3 typhoon to pretty much start slowly moving as it affects the Okinawa Islands. Another typhoon forming to the east of that in standard GFS fashion. Just a reminder, if you want to buy some of our stuff, you can go to the Force 13 store, buy some animations from Request. You can also buy some sweaters and hoodies, even though it's freaking summer, and I'm pretty sure no one wants those. But don't worry, if you don't think that's good enough, you can also buy a pillow. Here is the Scilly range, and it seems to be a typical case nowadays that the Western Pacific is responsible for things being in the Scilly range, because you can see what ends up of these two typhoons here. We already have an upper Cat 2 slowly moving as it affects the Okinawa Islands, combined with the fact that there's another category typhoon to the northeast of the Mariana Islands. You can see what ends up. The other typhoon moves west. They basically reach the same intensity. And then the eastern typhoon continues to strengthen, but you're starting to see that they're coming together now, which causes a future war to happen, bringing the western typhoon back down, basically affecting the Okinawa Islands again, while the other typhoon ends up sideswiping Japan and the Okinawa Islands just get drenched by a typhoon that was already slowly moving by them, and now they're getting hit again. So, yikes. Yeah, that would be bad if that were to happen. And yeah, I can only imagine how much rain would be in that. Do I even want to look? Yep, that went just about how I expected. You can see the track of this thing. It just sits there, does a loop, and affects the Okinawa Islands. But that situation would definitely be quite brutal in terms of rainfall. So, yeah, I don't think that's gonna happen. That would require a future Aurora that is brought to 2 models where the AOIs haven't even developed yet. So, I think we can cross this one off of not happening. Well, looking at today's on this day, we're going back to July 6th, 2014, where we had Typhoon IMAGERY, a Storm Force 13 of course covered, but it was downgraded from its peak that the officials had of Category 5. We now analyzed it to only be a Category 4. It ended up affecting Japan severely, causing $632 million in damage, as well as 3 fatalities. Arthur had just died in the Atlantic, and we were about to get Faust out in the Eastern Pacific as well. You can find more of our On This Day products powered by Cyclone History by going onto the tag on the bottom bar below. Well, that brings us over to the next names. In the Atlantic, we're looking out for Danielle and Earl. In the Eastern Pacific, we're looking out for Darby and Estelle. And in the Central Pacific, well...
No, Xavier, you are not making a stupid Hone joke tonight.
Well then, that was awfully slow and weird, and you just ruined my joke. It was also an interruption. Well, in the Western Pacific, the next 2 names here are Songda, followed by Trotzes, and in the North Indian Ocean, the next 2 names here are Citrang, followed by Mandis. I cannot believe I just got a Hone joke censored for once. In the Australian region, the next 2 names here are Darian and Ellie. In the Southwestern Indian Ocean, we're looking out for Ashley and Belita, and in the South Pacific, we're looking out for Holly. We'll be back for another TWB tomorrow night.